Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and tonight I want to kind of look through misinformation and talk about something pretty serious. Now, I have talked a lot about game ownership, and I think it's your right that when you spend 80 bucks, 90 bucks at a store to buy a video game, you should own it. Now, in the last couple days, there's been a massive controversy, massive drama in the PlayStation community. And that community involves something known as digital rights management. Now, DRM is this awful, heinous thing which basically limits your ability to share video games, to preserve video games, to own the stuff that you buy. Now, again, anything that you buy online video game-wise, if you buy a digital game, you don't ever actually own your digital game. So, for instance, let's say that you go to the store, right, and you're purchasing this game called Saros, which is a game that I purchased. It's a roguelike from Sony. Now, it's a PlayStation 5 game that's like $90 on the fucking store, and it's a totally single-player game. It actually is only for one player, offline play, no online whatsoever. In fact, if you go all the way down, they even ask you, is it multiplayer? No, it's a single-player action game. Now, why are we talking about PlayStation? Well, apparently it seems like some eagle-eyed people were looking at their PlayStation games, and they realized that on the PlayStation 4, there was this little timer that said 30 days remaining, right? So 30 days remaining for some people who bought a copy on their PlayStation, and after 30 days, you won't be able to access the game that you bought. So again, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, this is a pretty spooky situation, right? Because what do you mean that I don't actually fucking own the game that I bought? You know, back when PlayStation was kind of dropping PS4, back then Xbox One had this 30-day check-in, which obviously everyone disliked, for good reason. And Sony was like, you know, they had this whole ad campaign where they were like, hey, you have your buddy, just give them a disc, you know, share it around with your pals, and you won't even need the internet. Now, I think that there is a concerted push from every one of these companies to rip away your physical ownership. You know, PlayStation 5 is the first generation where they launched the actual PlayStation with a digital-only version. Now, you could say, oh, that was for people who wanted to save $100. But the reality of it is that I think a lot of these companies are kind of normalizing you into being okay with not owning your game physically. There's a lot of games that come out on physical discs, even for PlayStation, games like Crimson Desert, that are not even entirely on the disc, making it so that if you buy the fucking disc, you're basically buying a paperweight. You're buying one of those Nintendo Switch game key cards. You're buying an Xbox game physically at this point, which don't even have the entire product on the disc, making it so that they are effectively coasters, meaning 20 years down the road, when you want to play some game that, you know, you have nostalgia for, well, you don't have an original 1.0 version on the disc. I'm playing this version of the game that I would have spent the same $100 on, you know, tax included, except I actually own the disc here. I own the 1.0 version of the game. I can share this with my brother, and he can play it on his own, and there ain't any requirement for the internet. So ultimately, people were a little bit worried. Some individuals went to the PlayStation Online Store Assistant thing, and the little AI, which again, this online tool is not an actual human being, it's a fucking artificial intelligence. People were getting this whole, like, a response where it said, the 30-day timer you mentioned is related to console sharing and offline play features on your PS5. If you enable this feature, you can play your games and media even when your console is offline, as long as you've connected to the internet at least once within the last 30 days. If you don't connect online within that time frame, you may lose access to your games. So, again, your PlayStation needs a license in order to run video games, right? It is what it is. Now, when you go back to the same chatbot here, the chatbot goes, any games purchased digitally after March 2026, those are going to be affected because if the console does not connect to the internet within 30 days, the license expires and the game may refuse to launch until a connection is restored. Now, again, conflicting information. PlayStation hasn't made a fucking statement, and I honestly think they should. They have to give a statement because what the fuck do you mean? Now my games have a lifespan attached to them. So ultimately, there's been other YouTubers, this is Spawnwave, for instance, where he showcases how this ends up looking. So what he's kind of done over here is he's got a PlayStation with a bunch of digital games, And what he's also done in this story is he's went to his PlayStation, opened it up, and right over here you can see this is where the CMOS battery is. So basically every PlayStation motherboard has a little battery attached to it. The battery basically keeps an internal clock alive that allows the PlayStation to keep track of times. So even if you change the date on your PlayStation, you can't, set it to the future and unlock a game earlier that you pre-ordered. And basically it keeps a certain mental time alive for the PlayStation outside of the user setting. So he rips out the CMOS and puts it back in, therefore killing that mental note for the PlayStation. And as you can see over here, when he decides to load up his digital games, what's going to happen is it won't actually load. So he'll get this screen right over here when he hits X, can't use this content, can't connect to the server to verify your license. So now he has to connect back to the internet, he has to revalidate his PlayStation's times and everything just to make this shit work once again. Now you might be like, but Muda, what's the issue, man? I mean, don't you have the fucking internet? Bitch, you're using the internet to upload this video. And I agree. I think most people have the internet. The problem is, the issue that arises from this is the same issue that, games like The Crew or any game that was talked about with the Stop Killing Games movement. When Ubisoft took away server connections for The Crew and prevented people from actually having access to it, it basically killed an entire server for gamers. It killed an entire purchase. It wasn't until some gamers whipped out a private server that allowed you to connect your client game files to a private server and access the game content that the game was actually brought back. And the same could be argued for PlayStation, right? Like, if the PlayStation servers ever go offline, if they ever take those things away down the road in the future, who knows, right? This is just how things work. Once a server exists, it costs money to run. Eventually, game companies, they might realize, bitch, I don't want to keep paying for this. And those servers go offline, and then your access to that game or that console's connection to the internet will fucking die. Now, again, these are things that you have to think of far into the future. And that's the issue with like PlayStation right over here. What they've kind of done, even if this is completely unintentional, and even if this isn't as bad as some sites are making it out to be, again, I want to be very fair, I want to be very factual. This is a bad thing in video games. It is basically them taking away your ownership and your rights. And the reality of it is, it's not just PlayStation that does this. Xbox does this. Nintendo does this. I'm just even going to say like Steam does this too. Which is one of the reasons why, at least when it comes to this situation, I tend to buy a lot of my games physically as much as I can because, at least in this case, I own the game. If I can't even own the games physically anymore because they're incomplete titles, I'm not even going to buy them digitally on the PlayStation. Here's the reality. I will not be interested in PlayStation 6 if down the road, God forbid, Sony's like, fuck digital gaming, fuck physical games. We're just going to make a digital-only system so you can just purchase your games conveniently from the cloud and download them to your system. If that's going to be the future, there is no reason for you to purchase a PlayStation, an Xbox, or a Nintendo system because you're intentionally locking yourself into one store choice, one ecosystem. When at least on the PC, given how expensive consoles are and how much of a hassle consoles still can be now, you might as well just buy a PC because at least on the PC, you got Steam, Epic, GOG, every other storefront, and you get a hell of a lot more sales. And at least on the PC, piracy is so rampant. One thing I don't want to necessarily promote, but I will say this, there's a DRM called Denuvo that every PC gamer hates. Well, in the last few weeks, there's been a controversial cracking method called the hypervisor method that has allowed people to crack nearly every Denuvo game and preserve them for future generations, right? Meaning 20 years from now, if you want to play something like, I don't know, Star Wars, Jedi Survivor, you can just install the cracked version of the game long after EA would ever sell those games, or imagine if they lost the right to sell those games. Better example, Grand Theft Auto, right? Imagine if you want to play the original Grand Theft Auto 3 Vice City San Andreas instead of the defective edition that Rockstar peddles. You can download the original copy of the game, run a no-CD crack, and have it, as it initially came out, right? In fact, those versions of the games are better because they're more moddable than the newer versions that release, right? Which is actually a huge reason why you would play Grand Theft Auto in the first place. GOG, for instance, allows me to go onto their storefront and say, hey, listen, instead of purchasing Cyberpunk behind a locked system, I can just download all of these files or use their launcher. Even with the DLC, I can basically install this game offline. A single player game running without an internet connection. What a novel fucking concept in today's day and age. You know, I use this to play a lot of old games like Thief, for instance, where, you know, they have a lot of patches for modern systems. But isn't it so simple that if I want to play a single player game, I should download this one fucking file, install it, and just play it without an internet connection? Or like, again, my digital license to be fucking valid, right? What's happening with PlayStation is something that, unfortunately, is pretty much an industry standard everywhere. It's not just PlayStation's problem. It's Xbox. It's fucking Nintendo. It's every digital platform. It's even Steam. So, you know, people who want to complain about this need to honestly ask themselves the question. I'm glad people are complaining about it, which is one of the reasons I'm so happy that I get to make this video, because I've been talking about physical media for like fucking years now. I've been talking about game preservation for years now. I've been talking about why I love emulation for years now, because it means that I at least get to preserve the games that I enjoy. I play a lot of old shit, man. I really do. You know, if you dig up my Steam Deck, half of my Steam Deck storage is literally PlayStation 2 ISO files, because all I do is play old games, really good games from an era of video gaming that I have a lot of real nostalgia for. You know, thankfully is playable because of emulators, because those games, when they released on the disc, were very completed on the disc. Unlike today's day and age, where you'd be lucky to get finished games, even if they're single-player titles, you know what I mean? Like, imagine if you live in a world where games like Grand Theft Auto 6 are available only digitally, no physical copy, and eventually, you know, you purchase these games and it's like, holy shit, they have this lifespan attached to them, that if I'm not connected to the internet, I lose access to the game that I bought. Now again, it's not the internet that's the issue. All of us, you're using the internet to watch this video. The problem is, when you have a platform like PlayStation, it's not a PC, it's a closed platform. You need to connect through Sony servers. So if Sony has an issue in the future, you've now lost access to the digital shit that you've purchased over the years. It's one of the reasons why I don't buy a lot of digital stuff from Sony or Microsoft or even Nintendo. It's why I have a huge physical collection. Because at some point, servers will die, you know, and it's not like Steam where I can at least crack the game and have access to my digital game once again. No, it's a fucking console. It's a console with a limited lifespan. So even if the console breaks, I can at least get a newer console or fix my console and put in a cartridge or a Blu-ray and play the game right there. PlayStation, you know, I'm sure that what's going to happen is Sony's going to come and say, oh, this was an unintentional bug, we didn't mean it. But the reality is I think, personally, since this is now here, PlayStation probably wanted to sneak it in to see how far they could push the DRM envelope. If nobody bitched about this, they'd be like, okay, cool, make it go, escalate it even further. People are complaining, so they probably have to roll this back. But here's the thing. Once you've already shown that you're doing this kind of behavior, you are not to be trusted as a corporation. These are corporations. They don't care about you. They care about their bottom fucking line. And the bottom line for a company like Sony is that they want to make millions of fucking dollars, billions of dollars, and for them, it's probably beneficial if you have less and less rights to the media that you purchase. So look, for now, buy your games as physically as you fucking can, because this is the only way for you to own your stuff on your system. Because down the road, when PS6 drops, maybe not PlayStation 6, but definitely something like PlayStation 7, these physical copies will eventually be attempted to be phased out. This is the end goal. The end goal is giving you less ownership, less control over the stuff you buy, and this kind of behavior is there to test the waters, to begin the normalization, and lead it out, right? You know, people called me crazy for years talking about buying fucking discs, game preservation. They're like, you're a boomer, Muda, you're an old man screaming at clouds. But mark my fucking words, man. These companies will Give them an inch, they will take 10 miles, 100 miles to take away whatever ownership you have and whatever rights you have. Because if you just keep giving them money and they keep doing this kind of stuff, I mean, who's really the fucking lemon in that? Who's really, like, come on now, you know? But what Sony is doing is not so different from basically every other person out there, which just really begs the question, if this is the world we live in, you know, at what point do we just say, fuck the consoles? Because if this is something that is confirmed to be a new feature by Sony and not a bug, I have no interest in future PlayStations, just like I have no interest in future Xboxes, or really any platform that does this kind of stuff. If the games are going to be releasing on PC anyways, I might as well just buy them on Steam because it's a substantially better platform than Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo. And at least with Steam, I can at least share it or use it across multiple computer systems and not one specific piece of hardware. Ladies and gentlemen, fuck me, man. PlayStation, what is you doing, man? What are we doing here, dude? God damn. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.